China's GDP in 2021 was 17.72 trillion USD. In comparison, the United States GDP was 23.32 trillion USD. China has a population of 1.443 billion, while the US has a population of 332 million. China will keep growing and overtake the USA as the global economic superpower. There's just one problem. The problem is the debt to GDP ratio. In 2022, their government debt to GDP ratio stood at 76.9%. However, this was just the government. The total debt to GDP, including households and corporations, is roughly 3 times larger than China's GDP. This is where things get a little tricky. Compared to the USA, the current leading global economy, China has around 30% more overall debt to GDP. China has a GDP of 17.5 trillion USD and a total debt of 51.87 trillion USD. If we go back in history, the country hasn't seen the ratio this high since 1995. The debt rose, despite the government urging households and businesses to stop borrowing money. So what does this mean for China? If they continue servicing the debt, making all the monthly payments on time, they will have no problem with it. However, if they are unable to service the debt, then they'll run into some serious difficulties. Since 2015, China's interest payments on its debt have been increasing. From around 2% of local government income, the interest payments now represent 10% of the local government income. And there are only 2 ways to service this debt. Smashing that like button just like you should if you haven't done so already. But no, in all seriousness, the first way is to issue bonds that people buy to service the interest payments, which is basically like more debt. Or 2, cut expenditures. The first solution will solve problems in the short term. However, it will only worsen the situation in the long term. And we all know how governments feel about cutting expenditures in the middle of a crisis. While the rest of the global economies opened up and moved away from COVID-19, the Chinese government tightened its grip. Their zero-COVID policy has only stunted economic growth. Since business is slowing down, the government is not receiving the funding it needs to service the debt. The solution? Issue more debt. Imagine China as a big household, a family. The Li family has a mortgage and a car loan, 2 working parents, and 2 children that the parents need to take care of. What happens to the household when one of the parents gets laid off during the pandemic? Do the mortgage payments stop coming in? The car loan and monthly mortgage payments keep coming in, but now they represent a larger chunk of the family's income. If the second parent doesn't find a job, and fast, they'll not be able to make the minimum monthly payments on the car and the house. Similarly, the Chinese government needs to find a way to pay its debt. Currently, they don't have a problem. However, the pandemic shined a light on China's debt problems. Economic analysts stopped championing the country as the economic leader of the world that will replace the US in the coming years. To know why this is bad for Chinese economic growth, we have to look at how China's economic growth began. Deng Xiaoping became the leader of the People's Republic of China. And through slow reforms, he forever changed China's economy and infrastructure. He is called the architect of modern China. From a closed-up, poverty-stricken socialist country, began embracing the global market. Economic growth followed, and China became the largest manufacturer in the world. When you take a cheap labor force and you multiply it by around 1 billion times, then you have unparalleled economic growth. In fact, during this time, it wasn't uncommon for the country's economy to grow at an unprecedented 12% per year. In 2008, this growth slowed down. China's economy relied heavily on exports, and as the market bubble burst and the West fell into an economic crisis, demand for Chinese manufacturing decreased. The crisis affected it indirectly. To avoid economic decrease, the government started pumping money into infrastructure. The motto was build, build, build. And they did. Roads, high-speed railways, airports, harbors, etc. All of these impressive infrastructure projects were built by the government to replace the dwindling demand for Chinese manufacturing. Construction workers replaced manufacturing workers. However, these high-speed railways, harbors, and roads were underutilized. They connect sections of the country that, quite simply, don't need to be connected. And if that wasn't bad enough, China went after another sector: real estate. Why? to raise money for Beijing's plans on infrastructure projects. The government owned land that was placed on the market and public companies bought it up. They started building large skyscrapers, and it wasn't uncommon for real estate developers to bite more than they can chew. As the demand for housing was satiated, developers couldn't sell their giant skyscrapers. This is the reason China has so many ghost cities. Giant unfinished skyscrapers can be found all across China. If they were to be finished, they could house France's entire population. With more regulations, developers began smashing that subscribe button just like you should if you haven't done so already. But no, seriously now, with the restrictions, developers couldn't complete construction, leaving hundreds of thousands of people who bought apartments with mountains of debt. So people have massive debts, local governments have massive debt, and Beijing doesn't know how to fix this problem. So you might say, but the US found itself in a very similar situation in 2008. Can't China do the same? Not really. You see, the US has two major advantages over China. 1. The dollar is the reserve currency of the world. And 2. They have internal consumption. When a global superpower has a powerful currency, it can artificially boost the economy by flooding the market with more money. This is not a good practice in the long term, as it devalues the currency and spikes inflation. However, in the short term, it offers a quick fix to almost any economic problem. The US market is one of the largest in the world. People like to spend. China is currently facing the opposite. After the pandemic, people like to save their money. However, the pandemic and the zero COVID policy are only part of the reason Chinese people save their money. The other part is retirement. You see, the public welfare scheme doesn't cover the entire population. Chinese people are the biggest savers in the world, and the holes in the social safety net are the main reason for this. The effects of China's one-child policy in the past will be felt more severely in the coming years. The number of old people increases, and to pay for the pension plans of this growing old population, the government will have to tax the working population. However, the number of working people is lower than the number of people retiring. So the new generation will be facing greater financial burdens as the years go by. Economic analysts say that the country can surpass the USA as the global economic power by 2035. But there's a catch. The government needs to enact policies that promote growth. If they don't do this by 2027, China will never surpass the USA as the world's leading economic superpower. You'll love these videos next.